Part 2. Organizational Team Warfare. You may have brilliant ideas. You may be able to invent unbeatable strategies. But if the group that you lead and that you depend on to execute your plans is unresponsive and uncreative, and if its members always put their personal agendas first, your ideas will mean nothing. You must learn the lesson of war. It is the structure of the army, the chain of command, and the relationship of the parts to the whole that will give your strategies force. The primary goal in war is to build speed and mobility into the very structure of your army. That means having a single authority on top, avoiding the hesitancy and confusion of divided leadership. It means giving soldiers a sense of the overall goal to be accomplished and the latitude to take action to meet that goal. Instead of reacting like automatons, they are able to respond to events in the field. Finally, it means motivating soldiers, creating an overall esprit de corps that gives them irresistible momentum. With forces organized in this manner, a general can adapt to circumstances faster than the enemy can, gaining a decided advantage. This military model is extremely adaptable to any group. It has one simple requirement. Before formulating a strategy or taking action, understand the structure of your group. You can always change it and redesign it to fit your purposes. The following 3 chapters will help you focus on this critical issue and give you strategic options, possible organizational models to follow, as well as disastrous mistakes to avoid. Avoid the snares of groupthink. The command and control strategy. The problem in leading any group is that people inevitably have their own agendas. If you are too authoritarian, they will resent you and rebel in silent ways. If you are too easygoing, they will revert to their natural selfishness and you will lose control. You have to create a chain of command in which people do not feel constrained by your influence, yet follow your lead. Put the right people in place, people who will enact this spirit of your ideas without being automatons. Make your commands clear and inspiring, focusing attention on the team, not the leader. Create a sense of participation, but do not fall into groupthink, the irrationality of collective decision-making. Make yourself look like a paragon of fairness, but never relinquish unity of command. How very different is the cohesion between that of an army rallying around one flag carried into battle at the personal command of one general, and that of an allied military force extending 50 or 100 leagues, or even on different sides of the theater. In the first case, the cohesion is at its strongest and unity at its closest. In the second case, the unity is very remote, often consisting no more than a shared political intention, and therefore only scantily and imperfect, while the cohesion of the parts is mostly weak and often no more than an illusion. On War, Karl von Clausewitz, 1780 to 1831. The broken chain. World War I began in August 1914, and by the end of that year, all along the Western Front, the British and French were caught in a deadly stalemate with the Germans. Meanwhile, though, on the Eastern Front, Germany was badly beating the Russians, allies of Britain and France. Britain's military leaders had to try a new strategy, and their plan, backed by First Lord of the Admiralty Winston Churchill and others, was to stage an attack on Gallipoli, a peninsula on Turkey's Dardanelles Strait. Turkey was an ally of Germany's, and the Dardanelles was the gateway to Constantinople, Turkey's capital, present-day Istanbul. If the Allies could take Gallipoli, Constantinople would follow, and Turkey would have to leave the war. In addition, using bases in Turkey and the Balkans, the Allies could attack Germany from the southeast, dividing its armies and weakening its ability to fight on the Western Front. They would also have a clear supply line to Russia. Victory at Gallipoli would change the course of the war. The plan was approved, and in March 1915, General Sir Ian Hamilton was named to lead the campaign. Hamilton, at 62, was an able strategist and an experienced commander. He and Churchill felt certain that their forces, including Australians and New Zealanders, would outmatch the Turks. Churchill's orders were simple: take Constantinople. He left the details to the general. Hamilton's plan was to land at 3 points on the southwestern tip of the Gallipoli Peninsula, secure the beaches, and sweep north. The landings took place on April 27th. From the beginning, almost everything went wrong. The army's maps were inaccurate. Its troops landed in the wrong places. The beaches were much narrower than expected. Worst of all, the Turks fought back unexpectedly fiercely and well. At the end of the first day, most of the Allies' 70,000 men had landed, but they were unable to advance beyond the beaches, where the Turks would hold them pinned down for several weeks. It was another stalemate. Gallipoli had become a disaster. All seemed lost, but in June, Churchill convinced the government to send more troops, and Hamilton devised a new plan. He would land at 20,000 men at Suvla Bay, some 20 miles to the north. Suvla was a vulnerable target. It had a large harbor, the terrain was low-lying and easy, and it was defended by a handful of Turks. An invasion here would force the Turks to divide their forces, freeing up the Allied armies to the south. The stalemate would be broken, and Gallipoli would fall. To command the Suvla operation, Hamilton was forced to accept the most senior Englishman available for the job, Lieutenant General Sir Frederick Stopford. Under him, Major General Frederick Hammersley would lead the 11th Division. Neither of these men was Hamilton's first choice. Stopford, a 61-year-old military teacher, had never led troops in war and saw artillery bombardment as the only way to win a battle. He was also in poor health. Hammersley, for his part, had suffered a nervous breakdown the previous year. In war, it is not men, but the man that counts. In war, it is not men, but the man that counts. Napoleon Bonaparte, 1769-1821. Hamilton's style was to tell his officers the purpose of an upcoming battle, but leave it to them how to bring it about. He was a gentleman, never blunt or forceful. At one of their first meetings, for example, Stopford requested changes in the landing plans to reduce risk. Hamilton politely deferred to him. Hamilton had one request, though. Once the Turks knew of the landings at Suvla, they would rush in reinforcements. As soon as the Allies were ashore then, Hamilton wanted them to advance to a range of hills 4 miles inland called Teke Tepe, and to get there before the Turks. From Teke Tepe, the Allies would dominate the peninsula. The order was simple enough, but Hamilton, so as not to offend his subordinate, expressed it in the most general terms. Most crucially, he specified no time frame. He was sufficiently vague that Stopford completely misinterpreted him. Instead of trying to reach Teke Tepe as soon as possible, he thought he should advance to the hills, if possible. That was the order he gave Hammersley. And as Hammersley, nervous about the whole campaign, passed it down to his colonels, the order became less urgent and vaguer still. Also, despite his deference to Stopford, Hamilton overruled the lieutenant general in one respect. He denied a request for more artillery bombardments to loosen up the Turks. Stopford's troops would outnumber the Turks at Suvla 10-1, he replied. More artillery was superfluous. The attack began in the early morning of August 7th. Once again, much turned bad. Stopford's changes in the landing plans made a mess. As his officers came ashore, they began to argue, uncertain about their positions and objectives. They sent messengers to ask their next step. Advance? Consolidate? Hammersley had no answers. Stopford had stayed on a boat offshore from which to control the battlefield. But on that boat he was impossible to reach quickly enough to get prompt orders from him. Hamilton was on an island even further away. The day was frittered away in argument and the endless relaying of messages. The next morning Hamilton began to sense that something had gone very wrong. From reconnaissance aircraft, he knew that the flat land around Suvla was empty and undefended. The way to Teke Tepe was open. The troops had only to march, but they were staying where they were. Hamilton decided to visit the front himself. Reaching Stopford's boat late that afternoon, he found the general in a self-congratulatory mood. All 20,000 men had gotten ashore. No, he had not yet ordered the troops to advance to the hills. Without artillery, he was afraid the Turks might counterattack, and he needed the day to consolidate his positions and to land supplies. Hamilton strained to control himself. He had heard an hour earlier that Turkish reinforcements had been seen hurrying toward Suvla. The Allies would have to secure Teke Tepe this evening, he said. But Stopford was against a night march. Too dangerous. Hamilton retained his cool and politely excused himself. Any army is like a horse, in that it reflects the temper and spirit of its rider. If there is an uneasiness and an uncertainty, it transmits itself through the reins and the horse feels uneasy and uncertain. Lone Star Preacher, Colonel John W. Thomas.
In near panic, Hamilton decided to visit Hammersley at Suvla. Much to his dismay, he found the army lounging on the beach as if it were a bank holiday. He finally located Hammersley. He was at the far end of the bay, busily supervising the building of his temporary headquarters. Asked why he had failed to secure the hills, Hammersley replied that he had sent several brigades for the purpose, but they had encountered Turkish artillery, and his colonels had told him they could not advance without more instructions. Communications between Hammersley, Stopford, and the colonels in the field were taking forever, and when Stopford had finally been reached, he had sent the message back to Hammersley to proceed cautiously, rest his men, and wait to advance until the next day. Hamilton could control himself no longer. A handful of Turks with a few guns were holding up an army of 20,000 men from marching a mere 4 miles. Tomorrow morning would be too late. The Turkish reinforcements were on their way. Although it was already night, Hamilton ordered Hammersley to send a brigade immediately to Teke Tepe. It would be a race to the finish. Hamilton returned to a boat in the harbor to monitor the situation. At sunrise the next morning, he watched the battlefield through binoculars and saw, to his horror, the Allied troops in headlong retreat to Suvla. A large Turkish force had arrived at Teke Tepe 30 minutes before them. In the next few days, the Turks managed to regain the flats around Suvla and to pin Hamilton's army on the beach. Some 4 months later, the Allies gave up their attack on Gallipoli and evacuated their troops. Interpretation. In planning the invasion at Suvla, Hamilton thought of everything. He understood the need for surprise, deceiving the Turks about the landing site. He mastered the logistical details of a complex amphibious assault, locating the key point, Teke Tepe, from which the Allies could break the stalemate in Gallipoli. He crafted an excellent strategy to get there. He even tried to prepare for the kind of unexpected contingencies that can always happen in battle. But he ignored the one thing closest to him, the chain of command and the circuit of communications by which orders, information, and decisions would circulate back and forth. He was dependent on that circuit to give him control of the situation and allow him to execute his strategy. The first links in the chain of command were Stopford and Hammersley. Both men were terrified of risk, and Hamilton failed to adapt himself to their weakness. His order to reach Teke Tepe was polite, civilized, and unforceful, and Stopford and Hammersley interpreted it according to their fears. They saw Teke Tepe as a possible goal to aim for once the beaches were secured. The next links in the chain of command were the colonels who were to lead the assault on Teke Tepe. They had no contact with Hamilton on his island or with Stopford on his boat, and Hammersley was too overwhelmed to lead them. They themselves were terrified of acting on their own and maybe messing up a plan they had never understood. They hesitated at every step. Below the colonels were officers and soldiers who, without leadership, were left wandering on the beach like lost ants. Vagueness at the top turned into confusion and lethargy at the bottom. Success depended on the speed with which information could pass in both directions along the chain of command, so that Hamilton could understand what was happening and adapt faster than the enemy. The chain was broken and Gallipoli was lost. When a failure like this happens, when a golden opportunity slips through your fingers, you naturally look for a cause. Maybe you blame your incompetent officers, your faulty technology, your flawed intelligence. But that is to look at the world backward. It ensures more failure. The truth is that everything starts from the top. What determines your failure or success is your leadership style and the chain of command that you design. If your orders are vague and half-hearted, by the time they reach the field, they will be meaningless. Let people work unsupervised, and they will revert to their natural selfishness. They will see in your orders what they want to see, and their behavior will promote their own interests. Unless you adapt your leadership style to the weaknesses of the people in your group, you will almost certainly end up with a break in the chain of command. Information in the field will reach you too slowly. A proper chain of command and the control it brings you is not an accident. It is your creation, a work of art that requires constant attention and care. Ignore it at your peril. For what the leaders are, that, as a rule, will the men below them be. Xenophon, 430 BC to 355 BC.